So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. For today, our guest speaker is a principal of one of our local charter schools, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
Thank you very much. So it's an honor to be here to have a discussion with everyone in this room. My name is Heidi Strikwerda. I am the principal for Excelsior Charter Schools here in San Bernardino City. I'm also the English Learner Programs Administrator for Excelsior Charter. I work at the University of Redlands as an adjunct professor for our MALT students, which is the Masters of Learning and Teaching and Learning for Credentialing Program. So the students that I have in my class are all future educators and inspiring teachers, which is something I very much enjoy. So just a little bit about myself. These are pictures of my boys. I have 6. My oldest, his name is Damien. He is up here at the top corner. He's actually an educator. He teaches 6th grade in Victorville Elementary. Next to him is my second oldest, Dustin. He's in the Navy. He graduated at UCR and then went into the Navy as an officer. He's been in Japan for almost a year now. He called me the other night from Okinawa and really misses being home. Then I have my son, Justice. He is at Point Loma Nazarene, which is a really good school down in San Diego, right on the beach there. He has a huge scholarship for biochem program. He wants to be a doctor. So only 25 students in the cohort from all over United States got into that program, and it's very prestigious. I'm very proud of him. Then I have Bailey, who is a freshman in college. My son Dylan is just turned 17, so he's a sophomore. And then my baby Jordan, he's not such a baby anymore. He just turned 13 on Monday. So those are mine. I was a classroom teacher for about 10 years. I taught here in San Bernardino City at King Middle School. I was the English teacher, the ELD teacher, the English learner facilitator for our site. So I oversaw our English learner program. Then I became administrator there. And then from there, I went to Colton Joint Unified School District and worked at Bloomington High School as an administrator for 2 years. And then from there, I opened up this school here in San Bernardino City as the principal for Excelsior. So with all of that, when I started working at King, I felt very unprepared to service the students that I had. I came straight out of the credentialing program, right? So brand new teacher, and was not prepared for the achievement gap that I was facing for English learners, for all the trauma and the just social inequities that come visible or made visible in school campuses. And I remember my first 3 months as a teacher, I went home and cried every single day. Like I felt like I was not equipped to take care of the needs of the students, and I didn't know what to do. So being the person that I am, I enrolled in the doctoral program at the University of Redlands because I wanted to learn more. And I got my doctorate's degree in leadership for educational justice. So some of what I'm going to share with you guys today is my experiences from that and what I learned through that process and growth personally and professionally. I've also gone to the Philippines a couple of times. I was invited to speak at the University of Philippines in Aklan. They have a university there. I spoke to some of the teachers at a very remote school in Marinduque, which is like a rural area. That's this picture on the right, that are servicing some of the poorest students. And just a wonderful experience. If you ever get to go abroad and outside of the United States and visit other countries, it really changes your mindset and your outlook on life. So that's something I love to do, is go to the Philippines and teach teachers there basically in the Philippines, everyone's learning English as a second language. So I go there and talk about equitable practices and instruction for English learners. I'm also a widely published author. This past year, a couple years with COVID being locked down, has just, I just wanted to write about all of that. And so there's just some of my published work, and you could see from the titles, they're all connected to equity, hope, justice. Like my heart is to really service our students in our community and build hope in them and help them be successful in their future. So everything is related that I do. All the work that I do is pertaining to social and equitable justice. So if you're interested in any of the published work, my ResearchGate link, they're all there for free. You can just go online and download them PDFs. I've made them for free. And then this last summer, I published a book called Minding the Marginalized Students Through Inclusion, Justice, and Hope, Daring to Transform Educational Inequities. I did that with my, who was my professor, Dr. Lawless at the University of Redlands. We did that together. And so, yeah. So I'm going to see if, there we go. Okay, I'll put the link for ResearchGate in the chat at the end. I don't want, if you're interested. So I became an educator because I believe that learning creates hope and purpose. And one of my favorite quotes from Paulo Freire is, "There is no teaching without learning." So when we're teaching, there should be learning going on myself as an educator. I learn from my students and from my students and from each other and to me, right? So teaching is not just transforming knowledge. Teaching is helping our students grow by learning who they are, how they learn, and what motivates and facilitates their engagement. So as an educator, it's very, very important to understand your students, their backgrounds, all their experiences, and really value and recognize who they are to motivate and engage them in instruction. And I also believe that teaching is a joyful and rigorous human act. It's something that I'm very passionate about and very much enjoy. So as I shared, I got my doctorate's degree. And so what I did is I wanted to see what we were doing in education to create hope in our students. And so when I was working at King, one of the things I noticed was that many of my students were coming into the classroom with this, what I coined the hope gap. Basically, I noticed that they didn't believe in themselves very much, and they didn't believe in that they had a future. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they lived, in San Bernardino, and they would say things like that to me, like, "I don't live in San Bernardino, I live in Yucaipa, right? But I work here." And I remember one time I was driving to work, and it was when we had a lot of rain a few years ago, and there were just beautiful flowers all over the place. It was from the rain, right? And so I came into work so happy, and I was like, "Wow, have you guys seen all the flowers? They're everywhere." And one of my students raised their hand, and she was like, "Miss Strikwerda, don't you know we live in San Bernardino? All we have is asphalt. We don't even have trees." And I was just like, oh, it so broke my heart, right? Because that's not what I want my students to experience. I don't want them to think that they don't even have flowers or trees. And so, one of the things I do at my site is I have flowers and plants on the inside of my school, and I purposely plant those real flowers and plants, right? So that we feel like, oh, we're part of a growth and an environment where they can see how that happens. But it's just a reminder of like how much your environment affects you as a person, like where you grow up and what you're exposed to or not exposed to, right? And so one of the things I used to love to do with my students for the field trip every year, the first field trip I would take them to would be Santa Monica Pier, and just take them down to the beach. And there were so many of my students that had never seen the water, right? And so they would just, wow, and just jump in with their sweatshirts on and their pants on, just so excited because they hadn't seen the water like up close like that. And so just trying to build hope in our community is really what I'm passionate about. So what is it that we do as educators that builds hope? And so I did my study on my school that I worked at. And so I examined what pedagogical practices our teachers did, right, including lesson plannings, their way that they gave instruction, and assignments that were expected for students to do, and also their worldview or their mindset, how that impacts or creates hope in our students. So what I found when I was doing this study was what Berliner calls the out-of-school factors and how much that impacts our students within our classroom. So when you're talking about out-of-school factors, you're talking about like medical, things that we don't have control over as far as educators, like what type of medical services students receive, their nutrition, what type of environment do they have in the home, how much educational experience their parents have, if they were able to go to preschool, what type of support do they have from their neighborhood, what does that look like all of these out of school factors. And so when I asked my teachers, what is hope to you and how do you build hope in your students, they responded very, subjectively connected to their own personal experiences and what they see. And so what I noticed from the responses is that a lot of it had to do with the out of school factors that were impacting the students' beliefs in themselves and in their future. And so this is a quote from one of the teachers. It says, their everyday life hinders their aspirations. Just the fact that they wake up and are all sharing one mattress, the fact that there is not food in the house, and the fact that they walk this street where they see the condoms, the needles, the beer bottles, all of this stuff, saying that this is the lower class people. This is what you will end up being. You will end up drunk, pregnant, and on drugs. They walk over that every day. They come to a classroom here where multiple people have the same stories. Here they are living that same generational curse. Their parents did not make it out, and yet they are the ones expected to break the cycle. So this is a picture of a 600-pound gorilla, which is part of research done by David Berliner, where he talks about how there's this unseen gorilla inside the classroom, and the teacher just goes on teaching every day without recognizing what that gorilla represents. And so the voices of this teacher really capture that. This is what she saw in her students and in the neighborhood where we were teaching at, and how it impacted the students. And so it's kind of like we have this system of oppression that we need to help support our students to break. So how do we do that? So we all have what's called an intersection of identities. This is kind of just like a little image of that. And it's these intersection of identities that makes us a whole, right? There's pieces of that make us a whole. So when you're considering myself and my positionality, people, make judgments based off of your oppressions, or they're like, oh, you have a doctorate's degree, or, you're white, or you're blonde hair, blue eyed, and like all these things, right? And so we as people, we make judgments of them, and we don't know who they are, where they come from, or how we have the intersection of identities. And so in my life, I experienced a lot of the similar things that many of my students go through here. I just considering like child abuse or neglect or depression, teen pregnancy. I was pregnant at 14 years old. By 16, I had 2 kids. My first husband was very, very abusive to me and my children. I was homeless for a while. So all of these impact you, right, in your identities, and they make you who you are. And I found myself constantly in what's called this third space, where I felt like I didn't belong in my family life because I had a stepfather, right? And so I didn't belong in my home with my stepfather, and I didn't belong in my family with my mom and dad because they were divorced, and all of these different things which makes up who you are. But it doesn't mean that we have to continue to be what it is society says we are. And so at a very young age, I clinged on to my hope and belief in the Lord, and that he has a purpose and plan for myself. Hold on. And so it's with that like experience and mindset that I approach education, I approach my students, because I want them to all believe that they have a purpose and a plan that is particular to them, and that it's in that plan that we fulfill, you know, what it is we're called to do. So in the school that I worked at where I did my study, this is what's called a crime map. And you could see right here is the title, right? So right here is the school, and the school is buried in all kinds of crime. This is over a 6-month period. So over this period, there's so much crime that I can't even see the school. And these little pictures represent different things. So it got me to think, you know, where can a student living in this community go where they're not directly affected or impacted by this type of violence or negative perception of their community? And when you pull apart the crime, it's all different types, right? Because people go to where the resources are when they don't have resources. So there's of course, vandalism and robberies and thefts, but then there's all of this assault, which is the biggest piece. There's drug and alcohol, DUI, all of this. So during this time period, there was 3,521 crimes reported. And most of my students walked back and forth from school. So they were either going to either be impacted personally or know somebody that was impacted or observe it, right? I mean, so when I look at this crime summary, I was thinking, like, what does this crime represent? And it's very, very imperative that we maintain hope, even when there's a harshness of reality that may suggest the opposite. So if we're living or working in this community, it might suggest the opposite of hope, but it's important for us to maintain it. So when I was looking at this crime, I used theory to guide my thinking. And Paulo Freire talks about what's called internalized oppression. And that's when we internalize the oppression that's being put upon us, and we believe that is true, right? It impacts us. So I start to believe. So if somebody tells me, you know, so many times that you're never going to be anything, after a while, I'm going to believe that, you know what, I'm never going to be anything, right? And so you start to believe those things and internalize that. And so horizontal violence is kind of like a reaction to internalized oppression. And that is when you see violence being done to the same people within inside that community. So like, for example, let's say that you have somebody who is grown up in a very abusive environment when they were young, right? And so then they get married and then they abuse the people that they love. So it's like you're constantly continuing that cycle. So what I see in this picture is a lot of hopelessness because the people are harming each other in the same community. It's not like these people, I'm not saying that they don't, but it's not like they're driving up to Yucaipa and they're committing these crimes, right? They're here within San Bernardino where they're feeling all of this systemic oppression for what's going on within their own homes, their own families, their own neighborhoods, from the system or from personal, and then they continue that oppression amongst each other and harm each other instead of realizing, you know what, these things are happening to me and I need to make sure they don't continue to happen to the people around me. We continue to hurt each other, and it makes me feel really sad. And so this is what Freire calls dehumanization, where the oppressed people start to become oppressors themselves, and they turn against their own community because they feel that they have been dehumanized or viewed as less than human or as an object. And it's just a quote that he says, their ideal is to be men, but for them to be men is to be oppressors. And so you start to think about, well, I want to have that power and I want to have that authority. And the only way to do that is for me to oppress someone else, right? Instead of thinking about stopping it and lifting each other up. And so horizontal violence is striking out at your neighbors, creating waves of crime in a community. And this is why you see high crime inside communities with high poverty. And so when they attack each other, they feel like they're actually attacking their oppressors. It's what research shows as a duality. Like they feel that they're in control and they're able to attack their oppressors, but it's really that there's a fear. There's a fear of failure, a fear of success, a fear of freedom, but at the same time, they also desire to be successful. And so it really boils down to having a sense of control and power. So how do we change that, right? So the challenge, there continues to be a huge achievement gap for our student population where it pertains to English language learners compared to English only learners, and wealthy students compared to poverty students. This has been going on for many, many years. It's not something new, right? This is something we've been talking about for years when we've been talking about closing the achievement gap. And so this is an article from Flint from 2018. I know that it's old, but the test scores that we have recently, we didn't do them, 1920, 2021, we did them, but they were done online. And I don't really feel that it's done with fidelity in that type of situation. So this is like the last time we had like a really good in-person state testing scores. So this shows a period of 5 years over time, right? And so on the left side for English, for ELA, you can see the red is represent English learners. So 11% of English learners compared to 44%, or 12% the following year compared to 48%. So these are how many are meeting the standards based off of the CAS testing, right? And so you can see a huge gap between English learners and English only students that continues every year. And even though by 2017-18, there's an increasement from 11 to 13, there's also an increasement in English only students, right? And so the gap widened instead of closing. It's the same pattern when compared to low income or students living in poverty compared to wealthier students. When you look at the test scores between the two of them, there's always a huge gap. And this same pattern is for our students who are in math as well. It's the same thing. And then down at the bottom, it's just aggregated by data, by nationality. So you can see that both in English and in math across ethnicities, you have your Asian students and your Filipino students and your white students achieving much higher than African-American students, American Indian students, Latino students, Pacific Islander students. So there's this huge gap between nationalities. Why is that, right? I'm always asking those questions of why. Well, there's a huge correlation between wealthier neighborhoods and race. So when you look at who are the students that are living in poverty or living in low-income areas, most of the time, those are our minority students or students of color. And so wealth and education, there's a constant correlation between achievement and social class. So in my study, I use what's called narrative inquiry. And that's when you use the voices of your recipients to find out themes and basically their life experiences and what they have to say to come up with understanding a phenomena, right? So my phenomena that I'm looking at is hope. And so these voices of the teachers, these are the teachers working in this community. Some of them live in this community. And so their storytelling brings themes. And so I used a conceptual framework. I started with what's called the hope framework. I started with what's called the hope theory, and then I also looked at theories of criticality to create what I call critical hope. And I wanted to see how these theories manifested themselves in teachers' paradigm and pedagogical practices, and if they led to student engagement. And so these are just all kinds of authors that I read to prepare myself for this study. I'm a voracious reader. Lots of wealth of knowledge going into this study. So my theory, critical hope, is deduced from a powerful conclusion of a small set of abstract principles, meaning I used hope theory, which talks about there's 3 ways that hope is generated. And these are the factors: goals, pathways, and agency. So here's how this works. I set a goal, right? Then I have to visualize a path to reach that goal. And then along the way, there come stumbling blocks, right? And so you have to have agency to be able to persevere and get around to eventually reach your goal. So as you continue to set a goal, visualize your path to the goal, and reach your goal, you're creating hope with yourself. You're creating belief that I can do it, right? So you're being successful. At the same time, if I create a goal and then I have some stumbling blocks along the way and I don't know how to get around it and I quit, right? Then I feel like I failed because I didn't reach my goal. So you continue to set a goal and then give up, set a goal and then give up, you create a cycle of failure. So in the same way that you can create hope, you can also create hopelessness in yourself. That's how the hope theory explains that. Critical theories talk about the importance of having optimism, having ethics, thinking about what's going on socially and historically in the area that you're working, building caring relationships, having a sense of community, understanding that we all come with social and cultural capital, meaning that we have networks of people that build us up, and we have cultural practices that are very important to who we are. Having humanizing practices, which includes dialogue and reflection, and then citizenry and democratic advocacy. So these are all parts of being a criticality. And so I wanted to see to what extent do the voices of teachers of low-income students reflect critical hope in their paradigm and pedagogical practices, what themes related to teachers' language and behavior of hope, instruction delivery of hope, and planning emerged when I observed and listened to them, and then what recommendations I would have for educators moving forward. So I had asked the teachers, what does hope mean to you, right? I wanted them to define hope. And so I put all their answers into this word wall. And what I saw was that hope was something personal to an individual. It was very important to them about a personal goal that they had and the belief that they could achieve. And so I put all that together to come up with a definition. And so critical hope is defined as having an optimistic way of viewing and acting on the world from a critically situated perspective with a personal belief that inevitable change will inspire a sense of community, advocacy, liberation, and justice. So here are some of my findings, and I just gonna flip through this so that you can see that it actually was coded, and these are all the themes that came. So what I found with the teachers who were building hope in their students was, number one, they had built trust within their students. They held them to high expectations, and they had very caring relationships. These were those teachers that would be like, you are not leaving my classroom until you finish this assignment. Why? Because I care about you, right? Those type of teachers. They were very goal-oriented, and the students were willing to take risk and persevere as a result, right? So that's connected to hope theory, where you are setting a goal, reaching a goal, and persevering to get there. There was a lot of critical reflection, advocacy, and citizenry empowerment, meaning the teachers were very reflective upon themselves and their practices, and they advocated for their students and empowered them to reach their goals or to be successful. They valued optimism. When they saw hopelessness in their students, when students would say things like, this is too hard, or I can't do this, or I'll never finish, they confronted that and would redirect them and believe that they could be successful and help them reach their goals. There was a personal commitment to ethical responsibility and accountability, meaning there was no excuses. There wasn't, oh, well, the students are just lazy, or, the parents don't care. Like, no, there was no excuses. They were going to make sure that their students were going to be successful, and they were very responsible for the success. They were intentional about humanizing students through their self-identity and creating a sense of community in the classroom where everyone felt like they belonged there. They were conscious of what was going on, all those out-of-school factors that was going on within the community that impacts them socially, culturally, and the historical life barriers. They were conscious of those things. And they inspired their students to be motivated and engaged. Okay, so the concern for humanization leads at once to the recognition of dehumanization. And that means if we are concerned about people feeling that they are important, that they are valued, that they are recognized, it's going to lead us to have to also be aware that there are things and people and systems that make people feel the opposite, right? Well, in the same way, as I was looking for hope in my teachers and in their lesson planning, in their words and their behaviors, I also found a lot of hopelessness. And so this is the way that I had to coin that. When I looked at hopelessness, a lot of themes emerged that were basically the opposite of what you would find in hope. So instead of having trust and high expectations, I saw low expectations and mistrust. There was no goals being set. The students didn't have any coping skills. The teachers were uncritical. They felt that all the out-of-school factors controlled what happened in their classroom. They were very pessimistic. They ignored the hopelessness when it was present. There was all this personal deflection, meaning it wasn't my responsibility or it's not my fault, right? The things that they would say and do were very dehumanizing to students. They were unconscious of all the economic, social, cultural, and historical life barriers that exist in the community that impact the students' learning. And they were very apathetic. And as a result, the students were unmotivated and disengaged. So I'm going to flip through a little bit because this is basically the things the teachers said. But the main thing is that there is a hope gap that exists between students who believe that they can be successful and students that don't believe that. There also is a hope gap that exists between educators who believe their students can be successful or who believe they cannot, right? So I define the hope gap as the zone of difference representing sets of expressions and actions that reflect hope and hopelessness in humanity. These are just examples of that, but I'm going to skip through that for time. But you can see my study was very thorough. I coded all of the things they said. So from these two positions emerged the hopeful and the hopeless. And so this is just kind of like a quick summary of what I found. So on the left, you can hear the voices of hopeful teachers. For example, one of them said, "My believing in them translates into them believing in themselves." It's very, very true. Students feel that if their students believe in them, then they can do something, right? Because we take on or we internalize those things. Another one said, "Always talking to them and telling them that you are capable and you are able just as much as anyone else." It's very, very important for us to speak that hope into our students and let them know that we're here to support them and that we believe they can be successful. Another one said, "I try to approach them as already being successful. I tell them to trust me and then I say try." On the right side, you see the manifestations of hopelessness. One of the teachers says, I think we call students, we say they are apathetic instead of calling it students without hope. I am realizing that our school community struggles with their self-image, which is very true. I think it is probably a really big deal believing you can do nothing. And I feel a lot of them have this learned hopelessness. They feel they cannot do things. So there's a big difference by the way we approach our students and the things that we believe, the things that we say. All of that's going to impact our pedagogical practices and our expectations of them. So I would like to close with this quote from Paulo Freire. He says, education does not transform the world. Education changes people, and people change the world, right? So education is not what is going to transform everything. It's the education is going to transform me, and thus I'm going to change the way that I view the world or the way that I approach my students, which will ultimately impact them and then equip them and help them to be change agents in their world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I feel like you really, it was very informative, and like, I felt like you took me to a conference. Like, I feel like I need to pay you now. As I was thinking, like, it truly like took me away to a different place as I was listening to all these things, and like, it made me wanna, as soon as this is done, I'm gonna stop the video somewhere and get the names of all those books that I need to go out and read. Because I like to read. Thank you, thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I would like to hear from you. You know, what would you say is a piece of advice that you would share with any aspiring educator as we move forward?
Yeah, so my biggest advice is always simple. Like, first of all, we have to believe that our students can be successful regardless of their income, regardless of their neighborhood, regardless of their, language abilities, all of those things, right? We have to approach our students as already being successful and believing in their success. That's first. From there, I think it's very important for us to get to know our students, right? Who they are, how they learn, what motivates them, inspires them, and engages them. And that doesn't happen unless we take the time to talk to them and create those relationships and get to know what their interests are and find out, what is it that they're passionate about, right? So when it comes to motivation, like, motivation is not just a word. There are factors of motivation, and research shows that sense of belonging is a huge factor. So if your students don't feel like they belong in your classroom or they belong on that campus, they're not going to be motivated. Relevancy or meaningfulness is another factor. So if they don't feel like what you're teaching them is relevant to them or meaningful to them in their personal, life experiences, what their goals are, where they want to go, how does this apply to me? Why is this important? They need to know the purpose behind their learning. There's also, it's important for competency. Competency means the students believe that they can be successful and they feel like their teachers believe that they can be successful. And so you start putting these factors together and you really realize, wow, the teacher has a lot of impact on whether the student is learning or not, right? So research shows that parents are the #1 factor, but the teachers are the second factor. And when you combine the support from the parents and the support from the teacher, students are going to be successful regardless of all of those out-of-school factors. Now, it's not saying that all the out-of-school factors don't impact them. It does. It impacts them, and we have to understand them because it changes our approach to handling students or equitably meeting their needs when they need them. So it's very important to understand who your students are, what motivates them, and what facilitates their engagement. The last thing that I would say that's very important is never stop learning. We're always learning, right? So I'm a principal here at Excelsior. I learn every day. I learn from my kids, I learn from my staff, I learn from my parents. I'm always asking questions. Catalina, well, you could even contest to that. You come to me and tell me something and I'm like, oh, great, thank you. Can you send me that? Right? We learn from each other, and no one is better or superior or inferior. Like, everyone has knowledge. You have experiences I don't have. You see the world very differently than I see it. And so it's so important to have this like intellectual humility and be willing to ask questions and collaborate and learn from each other, because that's the only way we get better.
Yes, I agree. And one of the things you had shared earlier, that quote about learning, I wrote it down, but I left it somewhere else. It resonated with me because in the past, I've been asked before, like, finish this sentence. I teach because, or I choose to teach because, and what comes out of my mind is because I still have a lot to learn. You know, and I think that's the thing that drives me, that I feel like there's a lot that we can learn, and there's a lot that we can learn from our students as educators as well. And I do look forward to that, you know, hopefully becoming a bilingual educator, and then having that experience of being able to learn and continue to learn from my students. Well, I want to thank you again for being here. You're welcome to come back, and we look forward to see what you guys have to offer at your school. I wish you the best. I think you're off to a great start. I see the school growing, and I think it'll be great for our community.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Just a little bit about Excelsior. We are growing. We opened the school in August, right? And just really have this school in mind, that it would be a school that could help to build hope in our community. So you'll see that sign going up on the side of our school there. I hired a muralist, and he's going to paint that on the side, building hope in our community. That's really what I want. I want our students to be successful, and I want them to believe that they have a future, right? And they can do whatever they want to do, but we have to just provide the supports they need to be able to get there. It's not enough just to have high expectations. We have to support them and guide them with those expectations. And so doing, you know, anything that we can to impact our community, that is what I want to do, whether it's resources that we provide here on site, or making connections with Valley College. I signed our MOU. And so last week I enrolled 14 of our kids, which is very, very exciting to me. Valley now is coming back on the 15th, because there's another group of kids that, you know, are going to enroll into college. And these are all students that hadn't even thought about going to college yet, right? Or didn't think that they can, or that it was possible for them. And so just whatever that we can do to partner with our communities to build hope within our community and within our students, and prepare them to be successful for college, career, and life. That's what we do here.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody that came today. And thank you all of you guys who will be watching this later. We look forward to seeing you at another Educational Board Forum. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care. Cuídate.